What does it take to put an end to the tranquility of a society? I don't mean a small group of people, but a society as a whole. You would surely think it must be something terrible, something huge. Yes, something dangerous. Yes, but perhaps it is much more serious. Something small, close, common, frequent, that threatens us. If you decide to join me tonight, I am going to take you back in time so we can learn about a case that took away the peace of an entire society and put a country's stability at risk. On July 11, 2023, a piece of news practically went unnoticed. Most people didn't realize it, and if they saw it on some news site, they let it pass. It wasn't something important, it was just a news item that talked about the death of a subject. This subject, James Lewis, had died at the age of 76 inside his apartment, apparently of natural causes. Most people would not have paid much attention except that behind that man there was a story of those that upset the peace and security of a society. So we have to go back even further. 1981, 1982. The United States is a society that is quite calm. The Vietnam War ended in 1972. Thank God that was left behind. The problems with the Soviet Union between Gorbachev and the others, well, there they go. Now the president is Reagan. Fortunately, they already brought down Jimmy Carter. That man could not rescue those who were in Iran, etc. But Ronald Reagan was actually a Hollywood movie actor. Not a very good one, but he became President of the United States, which gives an idea that everything is calm if an actor can be President of the United States. The rest doesn't matter. And indeed, it would seem that nothing is happening. There is no war ongoing at that moment within the United States. Far away, across the border, in Comanche territory as Americans see it, there is the war in El Salvador, the internal wars in Colombia. The world is very ugly, but there, things are calm. In addition, there is a space shuttle. Oh yes. After the Apollo program disappeared, something had to be done. If you haven't seen the program, I invite you to watch the program we have about that. But anyway, the point is that the first space flight with return, that is, the space shuttle that would go and then come back, had already appeared, and that has sparked the imagination of many people. In addition, there are many super successful television series that are attracting everyone's attention. Life is going well. Let's go. That horrible fuel crisis of the 70s has already passed. This is more or less calm. The existence of the AIDS epidemic has not yet been declared. Yes, HIV, there are already 2 cases discovered out there, but nothing has been said about it. And people keep calmly going dancing and wildly leading a somewhat exotic life, because at the end of the day, it is a society that is calm. All those horrible things have not happened in schools like Columbine. There have been no major attacks. It would still be a while before the attack on the Twin Towers, the first one, or even the attack on that building, the federal building in Oklahoma, or the macabre incidents like Waco. So this society of the United States of 1981-1982 is calm, thinking about seeing what will happen with the Olympics, the football game, little things of that sort. And the Kellerman family is probably one of many families that is more worried about watching the football game, about going to their girls' end-of-term event at school, where they are going to dance and sing little things, than about anything else. But that was going to change dramatically. Mellie Mary Kellerman is 12 years old. In that year of 1982, she is 12 years old. She is a slim, nice girl with many activities, with many friends. It is a time when there is no internet, obviously, so the only thing she can do is call on the phone. And there are times when Mom has to shout, "For God's sake!" "Mary, hang up the phone after she has been on for more than an hour talking with a single friend." But 10 minutes later, the phone rings again, and it's another friend. So, well, she is a girl who has good friendships, who goes here and there, Dad works, Mom helps, works too, all that. They get up early, go, come. And September 29th, 1982 would have been like any other day, except that early that morning, Mary Kellerman, the 12-year-old girl, woke up a little unwell. Well, she didn't even wake up. It is before dawn. It must be perhaps 5 in the morning when she gets up and knocks on Mom and Dad's bedroom door. Mom gets up. Come on, it's still a while before school. It's still a while before getting up. It's a bit early. But the girl complains. She has nasal discharge. Her throat hurts. She has a little fever. Damn, it's a cold. Yes, it's a cold. So Mom accompanies her to the kitchen where she serves a glass of water, goes to a pantry they have and takes out a package with a medicine. It is Tylenol. Extra-strength Tylenol. A compound based on acetaminophen that has an antipyretic, that has something for the discomfort, an anti-inflammatory. It is something that practically exists in any home. Extra-strength Tylenol is an over-the-counter medicine. If you go to a pharmacy, you can take it off the shelf and take it home. Of course, if you pay for it. So it is everywhere, and it is, so to speak, the old reliable, the one that never fails. So Mom takes one of those pills, still with her eyes half closed. She gives it to the kid. The kid takes the glass of water, drinks it. Come on, drink, go rest. Mom goes back to her room and hears how the little one goes, opens the bathroom door and closes it. Mom feels relieved and sleeps until the alarm goes off at about 5 to 7. She gets up quickly and gets ready for the day's activities. You know, prepare pancakes. Prepare all that stuff that appears in the movies and that, if you've noticed, nobody ever eats. But anyway, the point is, she's going to prepare all that when she calls her daughter and the girl doesn't come down. And again, Mary. It's getting late and nothing. Until she finally goes up to look for her and finds her in the bathroom. She's on the floor. She's fainted. She can barely breathe. She immediately shouts for help. The husband dials the emergency number and emergency dispatches an ambulance. Mary. Mary is barely breathing. There are almost no vital signs. She's lying on the floor and she practically doesn't respond. There is no pupillary reaction, nothing. They put her in the ambulance and take her. But when they arrive at the hospital, a little 12-year-old girl has died. It's a tragedy. Obviously, it's a tragedy. But at first glance, it can be seen that the girl doesn't have a blow, doesn't have an injury. She hasn't been shot. Nothing. The doctor's examination determines that the little one may have died of a stroke. Perhaps the fatal combination of that cold, the fever, the inflammation, something caused her death. The news stays among them, Mom, Dad, and the immediate family. The little one has died. They go on with the day, doing paperwork. And all this ignoring that same morning, another call to the emergency department had had a similar appearance. And it's about Adam Llanos. Llanos is a 27-year-old mail carrier. He lives in an area known as Arlington Heights, Illinois. The girl lived in Elk Grove Village, also in Illinois, relatively close. Janus is a mail carrier. He is a young man of 27, strong, athletic. And the emergency call is because he has collapsed. He has fallen to the floor suddenly. That morning, he had complained of a headache. He had spent a bad night because of the headache, and early in the morning he got up, went to the pantry, took a medicine, and downed it. Minutes later, he fell to the floor, unconscious. When the ambulances arrive, they try to revive him. They try to do what they can. They put him in the vehicle and take him to Northwest Community Hospital, where he is declared dead once again. There is enormous confusion, but in this case, the doctor who attended the emergency does not recognize any sign of a serious illness. That man had no known health problems. He was an athletic man, a man who the day before was working. He simply had a headache. It is possible that the night before he had had a couple of drinks and this caused a hangover in the morning. That is not clear, but he is dead. He has dropped dead, obviously. Paperwork begins. Janus's family arrives, horrified to learn that their relative has died. But well, in the midst of all this, they move to Adam's house. There goes Stanley, Adam's brother, Stanley Janus, along with his wife, a young 19-year-old woman. There, or Teresa, whatever you want to call her. The point is, they go to Adam's house to meet with the rest of the family and come to an agreement. It's madness. How can it be that he died if he's an athletic man? Keep in mind that the people of Elk Grove, which is the place where Mary Kellerman lived, have not contacted the people of Northwest Community Hospital. Both cases are developing independently. At the Janus house, the relatives have arrived, among whom are Stanley and Teresa, when suddenly Teresa begins to complain of a bothersome headache. The fact of having cried, of having been surprised. Stanley also has a strong headache, probably the stress caused by all this, the tension of the brother's sudden and unexpected death, all that. So he goes to the pantry, looks for something, takes out a package of medicines, extra-strength Tylenol, takes a pill that he gives to Teresa, one for himself, puts it in his mouth, takes a couple of swigs of water, turns around to say something, to discuss something. Suddenly, boom, he falls. And next to him, Teresa falls. They are unconscious. They immediately call the ambulances again, who arrive surprised by the fact that it was the same address where Adam had collapsed. When they get there, they note no vital signs. Come on, a terrible scene. They immediately put them in the vehicle and take them to Northwest Community Hospital, where, upon being received, Stanley, the brother, has died. Teresa is in critical condition. She would not survive. She would only last 2 days and would die here. At this point, one could no longer think it was some natural thing. The doctors who attended the emergency and who had also attended the case of Adam Llanos, wonder if there was some contaminant in the house. That was the logical question. What kind of contaminant? Could there be a gas, some sort of gas that was very, very toxic? But there were other people. And when the people from the ambulances came in, the ambulance workers, the paramedics, would they have been subject to the same contamination? Would they have been harmed by the same thing? So a huge concern begins to arise. What is this? What is happening here? The doctor in charge, there at Northwest Community Hospital, after reviewing Adam's case and Stanley's case, and also reviewing the signs that Teresa presents, senses that something is not right at all. So he contacts a specialist, an old acquaintance at a hospital in the Rocky Mountains, an expert in poisons, and sets out what he is seeing. I have 2 cases, same house, young, healthy people without history. They dropped dead, or at least fell into a state very close to death. What signs do they present? This and this? Is there vomiting? Are there bodily injuries? There is nothing. Skin coloration? Such and such. Exam? So-and-so. Such and such. That expert asks the Northwest doctor to take a sample from the victim's stomach, the most recent one, and see if there is a smell. That man doesn't doubt it. The smell is of almonds. When he communicates this to the poison expert, he replies, "Cyanide. That's it, cyanide. Run the tests." And indeed, they take blood samples from all 3 and immediately send them. Up to this point, they still do not relate the 3 Janus deaths to Mary Kellerman A.S. death. But while this is going on, over at the firehouse where the firefighters who responded to the emergency are based, a huge concern has arisen, because how could this be? How could it happen? What could have been there? And as they are talking among themselves, one of those paramedics belonging to the fire department comments that in the emergency he had attended, which was the case of the girl Mary Kellerman, everything had broken out after the girl developed a high fever and her mother gave her a Tylenol. So one of the firefighters intuits that something similar could have happened. He communicates with the paramedics who picked up the bodies, the relatives, those of the Janus family, this whole team, and asks them if there was anything else, to which they answered, yes, they had headaches and took Tylenol. Is there a bottle of Tylenol? Yes. Immediately, the firefighter contacts the hospital and reports that the 3 victims of the Janus family and the girl Kellerman took Tylenol. The police spring into action. They immediately move, go to the homes, and locate bottles of extra-strength Tylenol. This is a medicine that is everywhere. It's like having an aspirin in Latin America. It is an incredibly common medicine. So they immediately begin to trace what is happening. Both bottles are urgently sent to the lab. The next morning, the report is terrifying. Cyanide. The Tylenol was contaminated with cyanide. They start analyzing it, and the results are even worse. 65 milligrams have been detected in a single capsule, 1,000 times the lethal dose. Cyanide is tremendous. So immediately the investigation begins. It's madness, because this is everywhere. So the first thing they do is talk to the people at Johnson & Johnson, and particularly to the people at McNeil Consumers, which is the one that distributes the medicine. Those people claim to have no idea what they're talking about. The police informed them that they found 2 bottles highly contaminated with cyanide. But Johnson & Johnson does not use cyanide in its processes, so it doesn't understand what is happening. But that is dramatic. Because while they are talking and coordinating, Mary Reiner, 27 years old, dies. This woman from Winfield, Illinois, a young woman, had just given birth. Her baby had just been born, and she was having discomfort. So someone told her, "Why don't you take Tylenol?" And without thinking twice, she took a Tylenol pill. Moments later, she is dead. When the ambulance workers arrive, there's nothing to be done. The woman is dead. The question is, what happened? And when the person who was with her answers, she took a Tylenol. The authorities immediately intervene, recover the bottle, and send it to the lab. The result is the same. This was already an emergency. But while they are dealing with this emergency, Paula Prince, an American Airlines flight attendant, 35 years old, a Chicago resident, is found dead on the table in her apartment. A bottle of Tylenol. Without thinking twice, it is sent for investigation. But before they can learn more, Mary McFarland, 35 years old, in Elmhurst, also in Illinois, suffers the same fate. And when investigated, there's the bottle of Tylenol. The situation is alarming. Johnson & Johnson immediately contacts hospitals and the main doctors to inform them not to prescribe Tylenol, to halt any kind of prescription. The authorities, for their part, the police, and the FDA, learn of this. They begin to work, but they can't do much because they don't know if this is a factory problem, a problem of people who handled something. But the situation is alarming, because by this time, 7 people have died from cyanide poisoning. But then some samples, some lab results appear. 3 pills were found in one of the bottles. They were not contaminated. They had been refilled. Of course, the FDA pounces on Johnson & Johnson and orders an urgent investigation, which Johnson & Johnson accepts and recognizes as necessary. Specialized technicians tour the plant, the entire production line where Tylenol is manufactured and bottled, but they find no trace, nothing. Come on, if there were 3 or 4 highly contaminated pills in a bottle, it would mean that in the place where the product is handled, the powder later placed in the capsule, there would have to be residue. But there is no residue. While this is happening, an order has been issued not to sell Tylenol medicines, at least in the Chicago area. The main pharmacy chains are informed, orders are issued, but a national order has not been given. At this point, a national alert has still not been issued, but when it is discovered that there is no such thing at the Johnson & Johnson plant, they order all the Tylenol out there to be recovered. Many of the pharmacies that were informed immediately removed everything from the shelves, but this situation put the whole country at risk for a simple reason, because there were more than 35 million bottles, 35 million containers of Tylenol just in that format, and about 40 million boxes of other formats. But that was only Tylenol. The problem is that Johnson & Johnson manufactured several other things. If this really was a factory problem, they put several million people at risk of being poisoned and dying. While examinations are being carried out there at the plant, Johnson & Johnson is sure. The plant is sure they are not to blame. Even so, they order the sale and distribution to stop. Moments later, they order bottles pulled from pharmacies and a nationwide order is issued. Johnson & Johnson knows this is serious, very serious. 31 million bottles were recovered across the United States. 31 million bottles. But moreover, this situation is extremely serious, because it's as if in your house you had your medicine that you always take, the most common one, the one you take every day, and suddenly you find out it is poisoned. But what if you don't find out? Then this generates such panic that the media begin to publish news alerts are issued. The Chicago police, the State Police of Chicago patrols the streets. The Illinois State Police patrols the streets with loudspeakers warning people not to take Tylenol. This is the moment in which that tranquility I spoke of, that peace, that feeling that now we are all calm, Vietnam is over, there are no wars. Well, over there in the Falklands there is the Falklands War. Sure, over there in Guatemala there is another war. Here there is another war. But in the United States there was this feeling of tranquility and power. We are America. Well, not now. Now it's broken. Now people are on edge. Now they are in a panic attack because people are dying from taking Tylenol, which is the most common thing, what you can find anywhere. The medicines are recovered from everywhere with incredible frenzy and are sent for analysis. The problem is only detected in Illinois, and very specifically in a group of pharmacies distributed in a certain area of Chicago. There are 6 pharmacies. In each of them, at the time the product is recovered, a bottle is detected. In each bottle there are 3 to 10 of these poisoned capsules. There is only one pharmacy where 2 bottles are found. The question is, were those the only ones? Because the others were sold? And if so, where are they? Newspaper articles are published reporting this. Press notes are made. The general alarm is given. When the analyses over at Johnson & Johnson are finally finished, there is no doubt it is not their fault. However, the operation has cost them $125 million and the absolute loss of confidence in a product that was a favorite. The favorite product. It's over. The product is finished. Now Johnson & Johnson holds an emergency meeting, a war room, one of those tense moments. The first thing is to know what happened, the second, how to correct it, the third, how to change public opinion, and the fourth, who was it internally? Johnson & Johnson knows it is not them, but they have to do something. So they immediately begin to work on what would be called the safe package. That was the company's response. Manufacture a package with triple safety seal. Destroy the medicines that were recovered, destroy them, manufacture new ones, make sure they were clean, carry out methodical statistically significant tests so that they could guarantee society that it would not happen again. But before launching the new campaign, they would have to prove it wasn't their fault, and that would come hand in hand with the FBI and the FDA, the Federal Drug Administration Agency. It would determine something terrible. That had not been an error in the preparation of Tylenol. It had not been a failure in Johnson & Johnson's quality controls. It had been a terrorist attack. That is what they determined. The recovered packages had been tampered with. Someone had bought bottles of Tylenol, had taken them somewhere where they had manipulated them, had emptied out the usual content and refilled them with cyanide, potassium cyanide. The chemical analysis determined that this was a product used in mining, but it could also have been used in metallurgical matters. It could also have been used in film processing. It was POW. It was impossible to determine where this cyanide came from, but whoever had done this was someone who had contact with one of these companies. While Johnson & Johnson prepares its launch with an improved and safe product, the FBI is urgently searching for who could have caused this. It could be known, or at least they managed to determine, that the attacker or the attacker had done just that: take the medicines, alter them, and then return them. The operation as such seemed very simple. In fact, it was imperceptible. A person who comes and buys 2 bottles from you and takes them away when a few days later they come back and buy another one, you are not going to notice if before grabbing that one they put 2 others there. It was impossible to detect. So the first question is, who was it? But how can you know? The universe of people who had access to cyanide was enormous. Where to begin? Phone calls, witnesses. They even offered a reward for any information. The authorities began to track people who were within a certain area. They detected that the stores were within a radius. That is, that the attacker would have been there. It was not someone who came from far away because all this had been carried out very quickly. The bottles had been purchased. In both the Janus case and the other victims' cases, they had been purchased in the same period of time. The serial numbers matched. They were not old bottles kept in their homes. They were recent. They had been bought recently. That meant that the attack, or the attackers, assuming it could be a terrorist organization, would have carried out this operation quickly, but within a single radius. No tampered medicines were found anywhere else in the U.S. The searches began. They went to the mining companies, they went here and there, and suddenly the FBI detects a suspect. He is a strange, sly individual. He matches the profile that had been made, the criminal profile, the psychological and physical profile. He was a subject with low self-esteem, an irascible subject in a low-ranking position. It was determined that it might rather be a male. It was never clear why, since we have to consider that generally when it comes to poisonings, they are women. It is the technique mainly used by female attackers. Black widows, you see. Normally, they would use a poison, but in this case the FBI considered that it was more likely to be a man, and that he would have a job close to those companies, but of very little importance. He should be a loner, with an old vehicle, probably a van. All this came from an approach. What would the attacker be like? And that's how they found a subject who worked for a mining company, in a miserable position, with a low salary, solitary, and with problems of anger and resentment. The agents arrived at this guy's house whose name was never revealed, since as he was not directly charged, it was not made public. The point is that upon entering the place they found weapons, and they found a book. The book indicated a sort, in one part of the book, of recommendations on how to poison with capsules. What more did you want? Well, the usual. Some fingerprints that could not be found on the bottles. Some fingerprints were taken, but it turned out they were not consistent. For example, in one pharmacy there were some prints, in another there were other prints. And, by the way, this guy's did not match any. But furthermore, no trace of cyanide was found in his home, even though that book explained how to poison with cyanide through capsules. The subject had not handled cyanide. They couldn't do much more than put him in jail for possession of illegal weapons. And while that was happening, something very strange occurred. Suddenly, Johnson & Johnson contacted police agencies, the FBI and others, to report a strange letter they had received. The letter, handwritten, demanded the delivery of $1 million in exchange for these attacks not continuing. The extortionist reported that the attacks would continue, would cause many more deaths, would finish off the company. Well, if they did not see themselves benefited with $1 million. And this should also be made public. It should be put in the newspaper. Johnson & Johnson ignores that and hands the letter over to the authorities. The authorities begin to examine the handwriting. They examine the paper, examine where it comes from, and discover that it comes from New York. It is strange. They assumed the attacker would be in the Chicago area. But, well, no problem. He could have come and then gone back. They follow the trail and the small breadcrumbs that appear in life, because that letter is signed by someone who is familiar to them. It is the alias of someone who is already familiar to them. But moreover, when the handwriting is analyzed, it positively identifies another subject for whom they already have a file. And do you know what that subject's name is? Well, James Lewis. Yes. Do you remember that at the beginning of the program I told you about the death of James Lewis in 2023? Well, that James Lewis, who died in 2023, at age 76, was the author of the letter. The authorities compare the handwriting with an expert. We must be very clear about this. One thing is graphology, which tries to know the person's profile from their writing, and another thing is graphoscopy. Here, through a handwriting expert, they identify that the handwriting of that subject is the same as James Lewis's. But there is also a fingerprint that is a positive match with James Lewis. And the search begins. They already have a candidate, to the point that they forget about the others. But James Lewis is nowhere to be found. Even so, they order wanted photographs to be published, which are put in newspapers, on television shows, in the middle of a television show. Since this was serious, don't lose sight of the fact that this guy had tried to extort the manufacturer, which showed knowledge of the attack, economic need, that is, a financial recovery. This was a targeted attack. But they also learned something else. A similar letter had been sent to the White House. Yes, to the residence of the President of the United States. A similar letter had been sent asking for a bunch of political nonsense to stop doing such and such, I don't know what, or the attacks would continue. It was a decoy letter, a distraction letter. The letter that seemed to matter to this attacker was the one to Johnson & Johnson to get the money. But he had also sent one to the White House. When both letters were compared, it turned out that the handwriting was the same. It's the same guy. But where is he? A frantic search begins, but he doesn't show up anywhere. Until suddenly a letter arrives at a newspaper. Another letter. It's the time when there was mail. The detail is that it is signed by a certain Richard Harrison or something like that. The agents are not fooled by the letter. What it says is that neither he nor his wife are the authors of the Tylenol attacks and that they cannot be blamed and that they were the ones and I don't know what. But Richard Harrison turns out to be an alias, one of the many aliases of James Lewis, who, by the way, was wanted for the death of his former boss, an older man whom he murdered and robbed. So they have him well identified. The problem is, where is he? And then luck takes one of those mysterious turns when a library employee, a girl who spends her days behind a counter with little glasses, arranging books and writing things down, recognizes one of the visitors and calls the police. Gentlemen, at the New York Public Library, James Lewis is there. When the agents arrive, the man has already left. But in reviewing various documents, they find a slip for a book he checked out. They find other things. The subject was going regularly. They wait for him, and the next day when he arrives, they arrest him. Shortly after, they catch the woman who turns herself in. The investigation begins. Do not lose sight of the fact that there are 7 people dead when the investigation begins. This subject claims that he has nothing to do with it, that he was not the cause, that he did not poison anyone, and that the only thing that happened was that it occurred to him to write a letter to take advantage of the situation and make some dollars. Well, it wasn't exactly some dollars, it was $1 million. And indeed, the FBI agents could not locate a single plane ticket, train ticket, or whatever that would place this subject in the Chicago area. Moreover, they had numerous witnesses who had been seeing him in the days prior to the attack in New York, accompanying his wife, who, by the way, had a steady job she went to every day. And every day there was someone who saw them together having lunch. They searched everywhere for any evidence. They found nothing that could link this guy to the crimes, that is, place him at the scene, except for the fact that he had extorted. Well, he ended up in jail. Obviously, he would be tried and sentenced to 20 years in prison for extortion, for mail fraud, and for several other things. He would serve only 13 years and be released, to later die in 2023. And the investigation? Nothing. All trace was lost. Shortly thereafter, they began to reduce personnel because there were no more attacks. But there was a small problem. It is one thing that there were no more attacks from that first wave, and another thing that there were no copycat killers, the famous copycats, killers who imitate the method. And in the days following Lewis's capture, and in the days following, near the end of 1982, the authorities detected 270 incidents, or at least alleged incidents in which medicines had been tampered with. Johnson & Johnson had already released its new triple-safe packaging, which had a completely sealed plastic wrap, the cap that required breaking a plastic seal and which had inside a sticker hard to replace. This sticker, or this kind of aluminized decal, was the third seal of guarantee. They had gone back to selling, it was selling well, they had regained people's trust, since it was just a single attack, and advertisements were made recommending checking the 3 levels of safety. Good. But 270 incidents of tampered medicines were reported. 36 of them were real and serious. The problem was linking them. How do you link them when you don't know who caused the Tylenol thing, when you don't know how that was, how it operated? And besides, these were happening in different places. But finally, when people stopped talking about the subject, that drops. Little by little it goes down. And there is a phenomenon that has been widely studied, the phenomenon of publicity causing copycats. If a matter is mentioned a lot in the media, several similar cases arise of killers or criminals who try to imitate or use the technique to cover up their own crime. That is very evident in Mexico. The crimes that occurred in Ciudad Juarez caused the same thing. Copycat killers, people who tried to conceal their own crimes as if they were those of that desert killer. In this case, they did the same. The problem is you could not tell whether it was the same attacker or whether it was another. 36 cases were fully documented. 1986. 4 years have already passed. Tranquility returns. We are all happy and the shuttle continues traveling up there. Although now there is a little fear because HIV exists and people are dying and ugly things have happened. So it is no longer the same society. In just 4 years it changed dramatically. When suddenly Diane Elsroth, New York, a 23-year-old girl, 2 extra-strength Tylenol capsules, drops dead. Minutes. It only took her minutes to drop dead. The big question arose. Was it the same attacker? The big question arose. Was it an old bottle? Something that had been left lying around? There was never an answer. In the case of Miss Elsroth, it was never clarified what happened. But the fear arose again. Johnson & Johnson had to recover bottles again, examine them, but no more were found. The police intuited that it was a direct attack, a person who wanted to eliminate Diane, or a mistake, and she had taken a medicine that did not belong to her. Something. There were many possible options, but the fact that she had died from cyanide was obvious. In the bottle there were 3 other capsules, which meant that the attacker could still be free. Unlike other 30-something cases where tampered medicines were located, this one had identical characteristics to the 1982 cases. But the bottle had been manufactured already with the safety measures, and it was a bottle from that same year. So the fear was still there, but there was still more to come. At the moment, Johnson & Johnson orders the withdrawal of bottles in that area. At least 2 more bottles were detected in the New York area, which again suggested the same attacker. It was not just a direct attack because the bottles were found in other areas. In the case of a Woolworth in Worcester and in another nearby area, there was another bottle. What was happening here? The authorities reassemble a task force. The investigation resumes. They determine whether the cyanide is the same. No, it was not the same. It had a small variant. The medicine was recent. They were not old bottles, and this was happening in New York, not in Chicago, so anyone could be afraid because now it wasn't just in one place. But the few clues led nowhere. The FDA's warnings about the risk of consuming medicines that were not fully sealed, well, had an effect. Products stopped being sold, but then the other thing happened. If you don't feel uncomfortable at this moment, and if you have a headache, you already thought twice about taking something. Well, it gets worse because in that same year of 1986, in June, Sue Snow, a bank employee, 40 years old in Washington, decides to take something for her headache. She had been working very hard those days. So when she wakes up that June 11th, 1986 with a fatal headache, she decides to take something. In this case, it was a medicine known as extra-strength Excedrin. No, it wasn't the same brand. It wasn't the same. It was no longer Tylenol. Now it was Excedrin. Minutes later, she is dead. When her 15-year-old daughter goes to look for her, she finds her lying on the floor. The ambulances arrive. There are hardly any vital signs. When she arrives at the hospital, she is dead. The doctor, well, in this case, a lady doctor who examines her, upon reviewing the stomach contents, detects the unmistakable smell of almonds. Cyanide. The alarm is immediately raised, but not even before there was another attack. Yes, in this case there would be at least 2 other people who died because of extra-strength Excedrin. If you thought the panic had been left behind, well, no. As soon as this news gets out, people run to throw away what they have in the trash. All those medicines that were not sold by prescription ended up in the trash. Why? Because of panic. because you don't know when it will be your turn, because it was already in Chicago, in New York, and now in Washington. In this frenzy, in this madness, a woman, Stella Nichol, approaches the authorities. This happened a few days after Sue Snow's death. Stella Nichol claims to believe that her husband was a victim of that killer. She reports that days earlier her husband died in the hospital and that the doctors had considered it a natural death. The man suffered from emphysema and had several complications, so no further studies were done. But she claims that one morning, when he was still alive, he woke up with a headache and general malaise, so he decided to take 4 extra-strength Excedrin pills. If the poison didn't kill him, the quantity would. But anyway, the detail is that the man collapsed, was taken to the hospital and declared dead. And she claimed this was because he had been poisoned. So exhumation and examination were ordered. And yes, the coroner who took the case examined it and concluded that he had indeed died of cyanide poisoning. Stella Nichol was certainly right, but she was also right because she had killed him. Yes, that same coroner, when examining the contents of that and specifically examining the samples that were sent to him of these medicines, of this extra-strength Excedrin, detected something that did not fit. The cyanide had small green substances, small crystals, that do not correspond to the poison itself. These crystals were strange. When separated and examined, they seemed familiar to him. And a good policeman misses no detail. And this man was truly surprising, because he discovers that, observes it, and it seems familiar. He begins to see where it is familiar from, until he discovers that he has seen it before. It is a product for fish tanks. It is called an algicide. It is a substance that is mixed with water and kills algae. It is something that is sold at any store. He immediately communicates and reports to the agents to go to Stella T.'s house and check if there is a fish tank. And indeed, there is a fish tank. To check if there is a bag or something that contains algicide. And indeed, there is an algicide. The woman had bought it. So that agent intuits that all this had been prepared in the same container. The woman had prepared the poison. She had mixed it in the same container where she had prepared the algicide. So they arrest her, give her a polygraph, and the woman fails. Obviously, she is lying. As more studies are done and a series of investigations are carried out, it is concluded that the woman had bought cyanide. She had done it, and she had fallen. But only she, in the case of Sue Snow, and in the case of her husband, Stella Nichol, had killed these 2 people. But so that it would look like it was the Tylenol attacker, she had left little boxes around somewhere. 2 or 3 more were recovered. All of them had been tampered with by Stella Nichol. She remains in prison, but the Tylenol killer was never found. In the case of Diane Ellsroth, it was never determined who had caused that, so he might well still be out there right now. On numerous occasions, James Lewis, while in prison, claimed that he had nothing to do with it. But he would tell them certain things that always made them think he had something to do with it. Like what? Like making a little diagram of what he would have done to carry out the Tylenol attack. He always claimed he was an opportunist, that it simply occurred to him to take advantage of it. But do you want me to tell you something? Although to this day no one was tried or convicted specifically for the Chicago attacks or the attack on Diane Ellsroth, there is a strong theory. A theory that pointed to this being a joint job, and the joint job would have been organized by Lewis. It is simply a theory, of course, and we are not asserting anything. But this theory claims that, well, at some point, Lewis would have had a partner. This partner would have been in charge of distributing the bottles with tampered medicine. At the time he was captured, Lewis knew that if he reported his partner, he would become an accomplice to that. And the sentence for being an accomplice was worse than the sentence for extortion alone. So he never admitted it, and the attacker is free. It is a tremendous police case, and it is not that the police did not do their job well, it is that it was truly a complicated case.